Hi, my name is Sangyoung, and today I want to talk about the United Nations peacekeeping operations, or also known as PKO, and its problem. So I think this is a very timely issue because next Monday we'll be expecting the UN Leadership Summit on especially peacekeeping operations. So what's the problem with the UN peacekeeping operations? In a nutshell, there is the imbalance of troop contributing countries dividing. There's a dividing line between the developing countries and developed countries. So the basic idea is that for now, developing countries are contributing more, while the developed countries are shying away from contributing their troops on the ground. So there is some consequences of this problem that make us cannot condone this issue anymore. So I want to remind you of the recent visit by President Obama to Africa, and he visited both Kenya and Ethiopia, and there were a lot of criticisms about his visit to those countries because those countries are ridden by, they are infamous for their bad human rights records. So, but the reason why, the part of the reason why he could not raise the issue of the human rights record was that both countries are strong contributing countries to UN missions or AU, which means Africa Union peacekeeping missions in Africa. For example, Kenya has been sending their troops to Somalia to fight Al-Shabaab, the an Al-Qaeda aligned terrorist group, and Ethiopia is the second biggest troop contributing countries in the world after Bangladesh. So we can safely assume that how difficult he was to criticize those countries only based on the human rights records because they are such a good troop contributing country. So what's the reason behind this imbalance of peacekeeping troop contributions? I think there are two reasons for the problem. Number one is the UN system, which is never perfect. So for now, the UN obligates each member state to contribute their money to finance the missions in proportion to their size of economy. So for example, the US is now assuming 30% of the entire budget, which is the lion's share, and including other developed countries in Security Council and many others from the West. But when it comes to the troop contribution, there's no obligation at all. So it's entirely based on the volunteer role of each member state, which is a problem. So there's now a clear cleavage between the financial contributors and troop contributors. That's what happened from the poor. No, it's not perfect, never perfect UN system. Number two reason is that there's a cost-benefit analysis, which goes well along with the dividing line of the, again, developed countries and developing countries. From the developing countries' perspective, there are a lot of perks that they can gain from their participation in the UN peacekeeping operations. For example, they can acquire a source of revenue from their participation because they are basically paid by their service on the ground, and they can get some training on the relatively safe setting, and lastly, they can burnish their image in the world. But on the other end, from the developed country side, they used to be strong troop contributing countries ever since the inaugural mission that first happened in the Middle East in 1948. But in the meantime, there happened some humanitarian crises in Bosnia, Somalia, and Rwanda that blew the deal to their contribution, and now they kind of prefer their missions under regional coalitions such as NATO or unilateral mission, which I think France prefers, and rather than operations under the UN flag, which they think has more strings attached. For example, the limitation of the use of force under the UN flag. So why this problem has become urgent now, which I think, or you might think that has been swept under the rug so far, which was okay so far, is that the UN mission has become unconventional when it comes to its mandate. The mandate of the UN mission has been as simple as to monitor troops in the conflict zone, which was easy, but now it has evolved into the protection of civilians and now even the prevention of conflict. So against this backdrop, we require more capable forces from the advanced countries, especially from the West. So we have a lot of things to look carefully on what's going to happen and what's going to discuss and what will be the outcome of the next Monday's summit in New York. So as the last takeaway, I think everyone here and maybe every leader in the summit will worth reminding of this quote from Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, to quote, "Peacekeeping gets other countries to stand up rather than stand by." So we'll see. Thank you. Question, please.
You think, sorry, I'm just very curious about your personal opinion about the peacekeeping operation. Would that be more like enforcement, more prone to the Chapter 7 style, do you think?
So as I said, it has become more unconventional, and they faces some cases they have no choice but to use some forces under the big category. I mean, in order to protect civilians, so there are some cases. So that means that they may be allowed to use some force, and that's what exactly happening in South Sudan nowadays. So in order to protect civilians, they are allowed to use some extent of their force, which I agree.
Ahmed, you're burning with a question. I can see it.
No.
And thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.